Welcome to the Take 92 podcast. My name is Sammy Warm Hands. I am your host, and it has been a long time. But here we are with our annual top 10 albums of the year. And normally I do honorable mentions and then the 10 best. And I realized I actually had more titles than expected this year, so I'm going to give you two lists. I'm going to give you one that's rock, punk, metal, whatever. And this one is the top 10 hip-hop albums of the year. And this is just my personal favorites, the stuff that I've been listening to. I'm sure there's a ton out there that I didn't even get to hear this year. But guess what? The major change that occurred in my listening habits, I'll say, is if you listen to any of these past episodes, I've always said that I listen to music on CD, which I still do, but I never had a streaming service because I'm not a fan. I don't believe in what it's done to the music industry. However, I just got a job at the beginning of this year, and it's the first time I didn't really have either my car driving around making deliveries to listen to my music there or a boombox at my desk. And I had to join my wife's Spotify account. I got some Bluetooth earbuds for the first time in my life, and I started streaming music. And so what that allowed is that some of the titles we're going to talk about didn't even get a physical release, or if they did, it was maybe a vinyl release and not a CD. And so there are things that I got to check out that in the past I wouldn't have actually had really on my radar. So, you know, say what you want. I'm still not a fan of it. I don't believe in it. But as a necessity, you know, that's what I had to do. And the records that I liked that I checked out on streaming, I went out and bought. So I've ordered or already own a lot of these as well. So no honorable mentions. We're going to go straight in. As I said, we've cut them in half by genre. So we're going to talk about hip hop. And this year, I got to open for this first artist at number 10, who's an old friend of mine from the Epic Beard Men from Strange Famous Records. This is B. Dolan. And he'd gone through some personal shit, some health shit, and it feels like kind of went back to the drawing board on this record in a way. And it's a change of pace for sure, and it's cool. Like his last one, he started doing some of his own production, and this one continues that. You know, it's a good mixture. But what initially drew me to his music in the Fallen House Sunken City record, that's what I first heard in 2010, it was B. Dolan rapping over Alias beats. And there was this energy and this rasp to it, and you know, it was very up my alley, just the kind of attitude that it had. And he still has those awesome flows and patterns in his rhymes, but the last couple records he's dialed back the energy and the attitude quite a bit, I'd say. It's more of a conversational style on the mic, and that's pretty much the only reason that I don't rate it higher. But there's some really cool songs on there like Fantasy Baseball or what's the other one? You know, I am doing this without any notes this time. I didn't even write down the titles of the records. I probably should have, but I just wanted to wing it, get it out there for you guys because I haven't done this podcast in a long time, but people always tell me they like the end of the year recap. Okay, here it is. It's called The Wound Is Not the Body. The Last Temptation of Wile E. Coyote. That's another song that I was trying to think of. That's a really interesting one. Each verse kind of has a different story a little bit. Selfie Sub, that's a really interesting one as well. It's a short record. It's only 9 songs at 29 minutes. Personally, you know, the punk rocker in me, I like a short record. But yeah, I would recommend that you check out my number 10, which is B. Dolan. Now, the next one is a group that I'm not really familiar with, but my friend Ogar Burl. If you guys remember him, we used to rap together. I send him some cool rap shit when I'm listening to stuff, and vice versa. He'll tell me what he's listening to. And he sent me this record called Stifled Creativity by the Beat Miners, and that's with a Z at the end. The Beat Miners have this record where I think they're a production duo, and it's kind of made like a Wu-Tang compilation where every artist, that they're friends with or whatever fills up these tracks. And so there's really no consistency with the MCs, but it's great. I mean, you've got Keith Murray, Apathy, Black Moon, Rascass, KRS-One. It's a really jam-packed record, and it's 22 tracks. So it's more than double the length of the B. Dolan record, but it's really good. And if I had a little more time, because I just recently came across this one, a little more time to listen, I may have rated it even higher, but at first one or two times I played this, I was really, really impressed. So wanted to shout out Stifled Creativity by the Beat Miners. Now, I'm going through these pretty quickly because in the past I've done these massive 2-hour episodes, and when I go back and listen, before I do another one of these, it's like, okay, I want to check out the last one, get the vibe of it, whatever. And every time they're too fucking long for me. So I'm just going to race through some of these that I've been enjoying. We'll talk about them a little bit, but I'm going to not belabor it with all the extra shit this time. Now, another friend of mine here at number 8 is one of my absolute favorite artists, period. This dude is a genius with the patterns, with the wordplay, with the flows. This is Casual, the rap god from Hieroglyphics. And he's got an EP out this year called Starduster, produced by Albert Jenkins. And it's only 5 songs, plus the instrumental versions of the 5 songs. But it's fucking great. And I have a hard time fitting in a 5-song EP like this on kind of a best albums list, just because there's not quite as much there. But my God, this is hip hop in its top form. There's never been a whack verse from Casual, and it's so clear to me every time I hear a new drop from him that he still is like the embodiment, not of perseverance, but like the dedication to the craft. And, we've talked on this podcast. He was a guest in the past, as well as B. Dolan actually was on the show. But we talked in the past about how his whole casual thing, his casual delivery can make people take for granted how complex the rhymes are. And he's not one to do the crazy fast, choppy flow that, almost sounds like he talked about how some people can sound like they're cheating a little bit because they'll pick words that roll off your tongue really quickly and, I'm coming and just make it sound more complicated than it is, where his is the opposite of that, where it's way more complex than it sounds, the way that it easily rolls off the tongue, the way that he has space in his bars, and he's not trying to cram in every extra syllable, and yet he's taking these, really high count, multi-syllable rhymes and just dumping them line after line after line after line after line. And always with personality, always with humor, and I just love it. So check out the Starduster EP from Casual and Albert Jenkins. Solid production and world-class rhymes, absolutely. The next one I want to talk about at number 7 is in some ways a callback to this artist's first album, which was called Doggy Style. It was produced by Dr. Dre. And so Snoop Dogg, now as the owner and head of Death Row Records that he's reclaimed, goes back to Death Row, goes back to Dr. Dre, and instead of Doggy Style, he drops Missionary. And I thought that was clever. The cover is like a package of a condom, kind of like No Effects Ribbed back in the day. And when I first saw a video, I can't remember what it was, but I was like, okay, that's not bad. But when I listened to the album a couple times, I felt like Snoop is really rapping his ass off. You know, he is just freely flowing. Again, it feels effortless. It feels so natural when he's really in the zone. And to me, he feels really inspired on this record. And I think that Dre is not really the bankable name that he used to be, simply because he's sort of this legend of reinvention, right? Comes out with NWA, has that sound, reinvents that sound with the G-Funk era, with the Chronic and Doggy Style, reinvents that sound again with Chronic 2001 and Eminem. And then when he came, and 50 Cent, and then when he came back, and, you know, I think it was like the Straight Outta Compton record, and, you know, he had the whole album that never even came out in the 2000s and shit. It seemed like maybe he had this sort of identity crisis. And when he came back with Straight Outta Compton, it was like, oh, I'm really trying to be modern. I'm really trying to keep up and fit in, instead of like, oh, I'm going to do the shit that nobody else was doing because this is my style, right? And a guy that's reinvented his style so many times, I feel like what's happened is he's kind of lost the recognizable quality. You know, he still uses very simple, clean drums, and, you know, he has some of those familiar elements, but melodically, you know, it's quite a bit different. And so I struggle to hear the connective tissue to Dre's other work. And I would even say that compared to most of the records on this list, if he was in fact the mix engineer, which he usually is not on the level of his older records. Like, his shit is usually immaculate, and I felt that some of this actually sounded kind of harsh to my ear. And so this is a Snoop Dogg record, but I think a big part of the appeal is, oh, Snoop and Dre have reunited again. So I think that Snoop really earns his place as the marquee name here. He really carries the project. And, you know, there's a couple goofy moments, like you've got them redoing the Police song with Sting, and Snoop's like auto-tune singing along. Like, dude, Puff already did this back in the day, the same song when Big died in the 90s. And so it's kind of weird to go back and do that. So it's a couple songs that aren't great, but like Thank You is a really good song. You know, so many of these just comes out swinging. You know, Method Man is on one of these tracks. And it's interesting, too, the connective tissue between some of the albums that we're going to talk about, because Snoop is featured on one of them. Method Man's featured on one of them. Eminem and 50 are on one of these songs, Guns and Smoke, which uses that Gunsmoke, Biggie sample. And Eminem is featured on one of these other albums that we're going to talk about. So there's definitely a theme in the type of hip-hop that I go toward, and I think most people who follow me probably know me as an MC, and you're quite familiar with that. But overall, I think this is a solid record. Again, Snoop's putting in the work as an MC, even if the production isn't quite as memorable, as strong, as iconic as their past work together. You know, sometimes it's got like a lame pop hook or something going on. It's just like, all right. And then I'm just waiting for the rapping to come back. But, it's a pretty good record. It's a pretty good record. And, there's a lot of tracks on here. It's 16 songs, not a lot of bullshit, but it's worth checking out. Now, next at number 6 is, kind of the godfather of all this shit. He's the original GOAT. He's the first rapper on Def Jam. This is LL Cool J. And he dropped this album called The Force. And when I first saw it advertised online, I was like, oh man, new Cool J. That's pretty cool. And I looked at the album cover and I was like, that looks terrible. And it's kind of got this like it could have been made in Microsoft Paint or something like that. It just looks like the intern made the album cover or something. And so I was sort of reluctant to actually buy it. But eventually I saw it come up on my feed again in Spotify, and I was like, oh, right, I need to check that out. And I'm pretty sure the whole album is actually produced by Q-Tip. Again, he's not on the cover, but I heard his voice pop up in hooks and stuff like that throughout, and the production is very consistent throughout. All the beats have a similar vibe, and so I'm thinking it's probably Tip on the boards the whole time. And as I mentioned, there's some overlap in features. Snoop is on the very first song. I believe he's on the hook of this song. We also have Eminem on the song Murdergram Do, because Murdergram was a track back on Mama Said Knock You Out, I believe. And, he's got a couple references to older tracks. I think that Eminem even has a callback to going back to Cali or something like that on there. 30 Decembers is a really cool song. Kind of great tracks throughout. Nas has an insane verse on Praise Him. Nas is one of those dudes I don't love to support after I heard about some of the stuff in his personal life, with his ex-wife, Khalees, but once in a while I'll hear him pop up again, and it's like, God damn, this dude just, I can't deny that he's as good or better than he ever was, which is already one of the fucking greatest of all time. I just try not to give him my money. There's also a track with Busta Rhymes, which is cool. It's definitely like some classic hip hop shit on this record. Whereas I feel like, Snoop was maybe trying to feel, current a little bit, or Dre was rather. This one feels a little more timeless, with the exception, I'll put the asterisk on here, that I think the drums throughout are very classic hip hop, but it feels like maybe there wasn't quite the budget, which is crazy with all these all-star names on there, but maybe there wasn't quite the budget for like sample clearances or something, or it could have just been the vibe they were going for. But instrumentally, like the melodic instruments on the track do not have that classic hip hop feel that the drums sort of evoke, I guess. And so that's interesting to me, that it's a little bit of a juxtaposition. But I tell you, man, Cool J has not lost a step. I think he can be easy to overlook because his best records were in the 80s. But my God, man, listening to him drop these really sophisticated patterns at times and really unorthodox flows, like the way that he's writing the beat at certain times, to me is unexpected. And I've listened to his shit for, 15 years at this point, and the fact that he's still surprising me is really exciting. Like, I'm definitely going to pick up a hard copy of this record because I've enjoyed hearing, this is a guy who's been in the game for like 40 years, and I've enjoyed hearing the hunger in an artist that was truly one of the pioneers back in the day. And I think it's so easy to sort of find your lane and just stay there. But this is a guy who really loves the art of it. And, he always has. But there's something refreshing about this dude disappearing for a while. You know, I think he was doing some like TV game shows and shit. You know, he's always done movies and other things. But to hear him come back, regardless of what you think of the music or the hooks or whatever, but rhyming at this level of excellency is really inspiring to me. And I think we should give him his flowers on this one because it's really solid work. It's really solid writing. And, you know, he's not doing that hardcore, intense delivery that he was doing 30 years ago, but he's doing it in a way that's still got energy. It's still got such a presence, and it's still got the artistic merit in the writing and the execution of the concepts and stuff. So I'm very impressed with it. I don't want to ramble on. I'm running out of, I need to bust out the thesaurus, I guess, when I'm talking about his rhymes. But check out LL Cool J, The Force. I think it's really, really good, and a rarity that someone of his vintage, I'll say, can deliver on this level. Let me take a sip of my water, because I always drop these unedited, you know. At number 5. Wow. We're in the top 5. Here we go. This just dropped on Christmas Eve. And immediately I was like, oh my God, this is a top 5 record. It is so good. I've seen this artist talking about this sequel record to, which I believe was his debut. No, it was his second record. And he's talked about this. He's dropped this title a million times over the last few years. And I'm like, is this ever even going to come out? Or like, is this just going to be a mixtape or some random bullshit or something? And it seemed like it was never coming. And then I saw on Christmas Eve, Redman posted, Midnight Tonight, Muddy Waters 2. Holy shit. I pull it up, 32 songs. 32 songs. Now, Redman has always been a dude to bust out the skits, right? So I'm looking as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 skits. Okay, there's 5 labeled skits that I can see at first glance. Still, that's 27 tracks. This is an hour and 20 minutes. This is an epic fucking release from, again, one of the greats who's kind of been, I don't know, a little bit out of the game. I think he'll pop up doing the Meth and Red stuff. You know, they might do some festival shows or whatever. He might pop up on a really cool feature, but I don't know the last time he dropped a solo record, and this is fucking good. Because Redman is not reinventing the flows in the way that Casual is doing, in the way that Cool J is pushing that direction, right? But Red has this presence and this sense of humor, this personality that comes through. And so all of his writing is so structurally solid, but you're more hanging on what is he going to say next, because he's such a character. And so the first like 10, 12 songs, or tracks rather, because there's some skits mixed in, first like 12 tracks are, to me, classic Redman, kind of timeless beats, and shit's really, really solid. And then in the second half, or maybe in the middle section, he pushes into a little bit more modern territory, and you hear him rapping over beats in a way that's a little more contemporary, and even some of his flows are a little bit more contemporary, and yet it never sounds like Dre or Eminem or some of these other guys that like try to latch on to a sound that's happening right now because they've kind of like studied it or whatever. Red's still out there just barring out. He doesn't give a fuck about staying relevant or charting or any of this shit. He just like, oh, I like that beat. Oh, I like this beat. Like you can kind of tell. And so I'm really, really satisfied that when he does veer into that territory, which is, a subgenre, era of hip hop that I'm really not a fan of, he never loses himself in that. He always sounds exactly like his natural self. So I'm never distracted by like, oh, this one's a little different. Oh, this one's, there might be a couple like repetitive hooks or something like that are, the modern simple shit where you're saying the same thing over and over. But like, my God, I mean, Red's one of those guys that I liken this to Sublime, okay? Because, I'm straight edge. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, anything like that. And I've always had, because of my family history with addiction, I've always had a real distaste, right? And so when I listen to somebody like Sublime when I'm growing up, and they can have a song like Get Ready or like Smoke Two Joints or something like that, that is such a good fucking song that I'm into that track and that theme, right? It's kind of undeniable, right? Most people, when they put on a fucking, all right, now this is the weed song, I'm like, geez, skip to the next track. Or if it's at a show, I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a piss, I'll come right back, But like, Red and Meth have this song, La La La, that is such a fucking banger. It's one of the best tracks on the record. And I mean, I'd say one of the bangers of the year, honestly. And I don't give a shit that that's what they're rapping about the whole time, because the execution is so good. It's such a good beat. It's such a good hook. It's such a fun song to listen to that, man, there's no denying. Doesn't matter what they're talking about, man, because I'm bought in. I'm bought in, and I'm appreciating, again, the skill level at which they execute this shit. So Muddy Waters 2, really, really, really fucking strong record. For an album that's that long, it is hard to be consistent. It is hard to deliver like that. Another couple shared features, as I mentioned, Snoop is on a song. Of course, that one's called Kush, so, same theme there. And KRS is also on a song. So, he was on the Beat Miners record as well. And so some more through lines between all these records, but Muddy Waters 2 is a really solid album. I want to talk about next, at number 4, another OG who was an absolute pioneer and remains someone who can still deliver a really solid record. And this is Ice Cube. Let me take a sip. All right. I saw a video out for Ice Cube called It's My Ego. I saw a clip of it online and I thought, yeah, that's not bad. And I think I can resist listening to singles sometimes, because if I'm watching it on YouTube, on TV, or on my phone, I'm not getting, the music's not hitting me with the subs in the stereo or like with good headphones or something like that. And so me being a person who's really drawn into production and the overall sound and mix of a record, if I hear a sample in a non-ideal setting for audio, it can make a lesser impression on me. And so, I saw part of It's My Ego, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's not bad. And then, I don't know, pretty recently, a couple weeks ago, I'm like, man, I need to check that out. Cube's been one of my biggest influences for ever, man. I mean, I was dropping references to his records on my very first rap records, like shit I was writing in 06, 07, 08. He was one of the people who allowed me to see as a punk rocker, like how I could fit into hip hop, because he wasn't doing the laid back Snoop Dogg delivery, right? He was doing that fiery punk rock energy in hip hop, right? He's taking that to breakbeats and shit and speaking on political issues and stuff. I'm like, God damn, this is what I want to do, right? So listening to this, track 1, Rolling at Twilight, I'm like, wow, this has really kind of a timeless West Coast vibe. You know, you get a little bit of those like G-Funk synthesizers here and there. It's sparse, but it's peppered throughout the album. And it's just got this sort of evergreen West Coast production style that I really like. And though my favorite qualities about Cube on those early records were the fire and brimstone that I was just talking about, this record is more of a laid back, you know, today was a good day kind of Cube, where he's, and I don't mean like everything's a, you know, positive message or something, but like he's got this more, again, kind of natural delivery in the pocket where he's not yelling over the beat. He's not rapping fast. You know, he just feels really comfortable and really in his element. And again, Cube's been somebody who could drop a really strong record like Gangsta Rap Made Me Do It or something like that on his later albums, like Raw Footage, I think was the name of that album. And then there'll be other tracks on there where I'm like, this feels off. This feels like, oh, I got somebody cook up a more modern sound of radio track or something. And it just didn't quite mix. Or like, I think on the Death Certificate reissue, the anniversary edition that he did a few years back, the bonus tracks, it was like, I remember really liking one of them, and the other one I was like, oh, that sounds really like kind of poppy or something like that, you know? And that was never his thing, right? And so whenever it brushed up on those modern like poppy styles or club styles or something, it would always kind of be like, that doesn't quite sit with me. And I know he's just doing what he fucking wants to do, but this record, for some reason, has such a, again, evergreen, natural, classic, timeless, however many synonyms I can throw at it, vibe about it that kind of allows me to just bob my head and listen to the rhymes and just enjoy it, right? And, you know, some of these dudes are coming from a way different era and a way different background than I am. So, like, when I put these on my list, you know, I'm sure that other people might criticize, like, oh, man, well, Cube said this, or fucking Red said that. You know, like, Redman has a song called Ignorant on there, and surprisingly, it's not the name of the song where he drops his anti-vax, anti-mask bullshit. Because clearly he's been writing this record for a long time, so some of the songs are, I think, a few years old. But, you know, like, just because there's a couple things in there that I don't agree with doesn't mean, you know, I don't have a respect for the platform and for them to continue at this age. Again, the longevity, like I said, about Cool J and Snoop and Dre and some of these guys, like, obviously Cube and Dre came from the same school, but, like, it's just so impressive to me that the hunger is still there. Like, does Cube need to put out another record right now? Or could he do another studio comedy film, you know? But, like, he still got that love for the music. I mean, I remember seeing him, I don't know, a handful of years ago at Soundset, and it was just like, fuck, dude, this guy is still such a powerful, commanding presence on stage. And to hear him put that back into this record, because again, he is, I think, above all, a great storyteller. You know, Ice-T as well. Ice-T is a great storyteller, but Cube has like the imagery. I think about a track like Alive on Arrival from Death Certificate, or like Once Upon a Time in the Projects from America's Most. Like, he's always had a really good ability to take you down this road and paint this picture, right? And I feel like this album is no exception. Another little overlap is we've got cameo from Snoop. There's like a posse cut on here with Too Short and E40 and a bunch of people. There's another name that we talked about a minute ago, Busta Rhymes, pops up on the remix of It's My Ego. It's called Egomaniacs. We've got a feature from Busta and from Killer Mike from Run the Jewels. That was pretty cool. I don't know that Run the Jewels has dropped in a while. I don't know if Mike is really dropping these days. So that was cool. There's a song on here called Facts where JD from the Lynch Mob was, if I'm remembering this right, because I've only listened to the record for a couple of weeks now. I ordered my hard copy. He actually go to his website, and it might still be there. I got a signed copy pre-ordered on the Ice Cube website. I'm really excited about that, man, to get the autograph. But yeah, this song Facts, I believe, is the one where JD from the Lynch Mob was locked up for a long time, and he's, talking about, getting back to his life and getting out of that shit. I think that's the song, yeah. But yeah, we've also got Corrupt and Be Real and, a bunch of classic features on this. Dude, you know the one I was most excited about? Exhibit. I fucking love Exhibit, man. I mean, I first heard him on like Marshall Mathers LP and Chronic 2001, but like going back and listening to At the Speed of Life and what was the second record called? 40 Days and 40 Nights. Those two albums, oh my God, are just, again, bars and bars and bars and bars. Like, if you're into that Redman shit, he's like the West Coast Redman. It's like nothing but fucking solid multis and punchlines, man. It's so good. Maybe not as wacky as Redman or something, but like, dude, to hear X pop up again is really exciting too. So, Man Down is the record from Ice Cube. Really good fucking album art too. Like, this people stopped in the street, cars stopped. There's a cop car out there. There's cones out, and there's just a little kid, like maybe 10 or 12 years old, walking down the sidewalk, and there's just two bodies sprawled out on the ground. And it's called Man Down. I'm like, man, that's perfect. That's really good. Right up his alley for, classic Ice Cube imagery for sure. So check out, if you're a fan of hip hop, you've already heard all this shit, but these are my picks, right? On the top three, number 3 pick, I want to talk about another guy that I got to play with earlier this year, and his name is Decca. And Decca is a New York rapper who teamed up with, I don't know, how do you say this? It's like DLZ, MKS, BTS. Is that Dills Makes Beats? Something like that? But he's on the production. Decca is on the rhymes. This is another album that's about 16 tracks, about half an hour. And it is virtually no features. I think there's maybe one. And it is so engaging from start to finish because Decca has a real mastery of the patterns, right? His rhymes I would liken to casual, like they're that, or like Mike and Nine, one of my other biggest influences, inspirations. His patterns are really complex, but he can still tell you a story, right? He can take the Ice Cube storytelling, and yet he can give it the casual intricacy, the technicality, right? And so he's a really interesting blend. And, I think some of his stuff veers on a little bit like maybe spiritual, like inspirational kind of like here and there, which would have initially maybe turned me off. But again, like I said about like, if you can have a really good pot smoking song that the straight edge kid is like, fuck yeah, put that song on, then it doesn't matter, dude. Like, I can listen to Thrice sing about religion or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Johnny Cash can sing a gospel record and I'll fucking love it. It'll make me cry because the writing is that good. The performance is that good. And that's how I feel about Decca. And I don't know him too well, but I was fortunate enough to do that show with him this summer. And I think it was the best show that I played this year. I got to share the stage with B. Dolan. I got to share the stage with Yotam Ben Horan from Useless ID. These are all guests we've had on the podcast. Did a handful of shows in different genres, and the Decca show was just really, really good. And it was cool to chat with him a little bit and to get to see him perform because, yeah, he's a guy who isn't super high energy or anything. I'm really aggressive compared to a lot of rappers, and yet there's something about, I would almost liken it to when I first hooked up with Open Mike Eagle, like 2010 or something. I remember he was doing this stuff that was real laid back, like way more than Decca. And I was captivated by his songs because, again, the writing was not just really technically sound, but unexpected in a way that's exciting for me. Or like Louis Logic's a guy I've talked about as well, another East Coast dude that can put together rhymes in a way that, not trying to be a funny punchline like Redman or something, but put together rhymes in a way that are so technically clever that I'm just almost giddy listening to this stuff. And so Decca is an extremely good writer and a master of syllables and patterns. So I don't know that I could give an analysis because I haven't played this one in the past week. I've done a lot of brushing up on these records to try to reflect on them for this show. But I'll tell you, every time I've played this record, there have been times where as soon as it ends, I'll just put it on again because it is just that strong. So check out Decca. The album is called Bough, I guess, Bough. And let me know what you think. Deca, Decca. Check it out. Drink. All right. Top 2. Okay. This is no surprise. I'm sure. I don't know how I could do this list and not include it, but Eminem dropped The Death of Slim Shady, coup de grace. And Eminem is one of my biggest influences, which it's funny to me that more rappers don't say that because nobody claims to really listen to this dude, and yet every time he drops, everyone's talking about it. But this is a record that's interesting to me because I think a lot of us might have a love-hate relationship with him. I certainly do, whether it's about content or, as I mentioned, departures in style, trying to stay current and weird shit, he regularly has beats that I can't stand, choruses that I hate and upset me, but the rapping is so fucking good that I listen to them anyway. And so, I have everything that he's put out. I have all of it. And this record I picked up and was actually really fucking impressed conceptually because I don't know how he did it, if he's still able to actually channel his younger self and perform naturally in his younger voice. Like when the single Houdini dropped, I was like, I don't know about this, but it somehow perfectly sounded like it came right out of the Eminem show. And he was doing his younger self, almost arguing with his current self. And the music video showed his current self rapping with his younger self. And it was really weird and surreal and cool. And I was kind of like, did he have to use some sort of like AI to like mimic his voice? Like, I imagine they would have had to do something like that, you know, or some kind of deep fake or whatever on the video to get him to look like that. But, you know, I was listening to it and I couldn't quite figure out, like, can he do that? Like, I'd be very interested to see behind the scenes footage of this record and see if he's actually rapping like that, or if they had to go through some kind of process to fake it. Because what happens throughout this album, and the reason I think I didn't like Houdini at first, was that in the context of the record, which is a lot of fucking songs, by the way, it's 19 songs over an hour long, it makes so much more sense as a whole piece of music, because the whole thing is like Marshall versus Slim Shady. Again, you know, they've done this kind of thing before, but this is more a definitive, like, split personality where they're going throughout his entire career, and he has recaptured every possible style that he's ever done. And sometimes it's like, you know, you'll hear a punch in or something like that, and you're like, what the fuck? But then he's doing another voice in the punch in, and then, you know, it'll cut back to another one. Like, there might be 3 different M&Ms on one song, all trying to capture sort of a different quality. And so even if I think that there's moments on here, as I mentioned, stylistically that I might not like, you know, I don't give a fuck about Jelly Roll singing a chorus of, you know, something like that. But like, despite those things, the concept and the way that he was able to bring those things to life and juxtapose them with his current styles was fucking nuts to me. And, you know, there's funny shit. It's very irreverent. You know, he definitely runs certain jokes into the ground. Like, God, I mean, how many trans jokes? Is like, he got more obsessed with his shit than fucking Chappelle, dude. There's like, you know, 5, 6 songs. He's going to talk about Caitlyn Jenner again or something. I was like, dude, that first rhyme was funny. I laughed at that. And the second one, I was like, okay, yeah. The third one, I'm like, dude, fucking, do you ever do rewrites? You know, do you ever write what comes off the top and then come back in and punch it up later? Because, like, Jesus Christ, you know, saying the same shit a lot. So, you know, he does that, but man, it's very entertaining, especially if you're a longtime fan. I don't know how much a casual fan would even enjoy this record, because it's not, to me, it's not a record with like obvious singles. It's something that I really enjoy front to back, because it takes you on this retrospective journey that's really unique. I've talked about before that artists might have this rare album where it sort of embodies every era that they've done in the past, right? It's sort of like the sum of all their learned experiences. And I find those very interesting when it seems like a band can kind of come full circle. Like they found their original sound that's notable, and then they experimented, right? And then maybe they fell off for a little bit, and they, you know, and then they got it back, right? And then they have this one special record that sort of has a bit of all of it. And that's a cool thing. It's always a cool thing for an artist that's been around and long enough to have, like, you know, 8 or 10 albums to do something like that. But to intentionally set out to do this sort of memory lane thing and to deliver it at this level is really cool. It's really fun as a listener. And so I give Eminem a lot of respect for this. I would say also, like the Snoop record, as I mentioned with Dre's mixing, because there's so many different voices on here, the mixing is not always great. Some of the other Eminem voices can stand out as like louder or kind of harsher in sort of the recording quality, which is another reason I sort of question whether they had to use some sort of AI or something to manipulate his voice to get it to sound that way, because it sounds different in sonic quality as well as stylistic, youth and timbre of his voice and things like that. So there's definitely something odd that creates an inconsistency there, but I mean, the beats are very well mixed. Again, it just really, it takes you somewhere, and it's very fun to listen to for that reason. So check it out if you're a fan of his. I think it does a really good job of taking you through all of his different styles. Now, it should have probably ended earlier. I don't think that it needs to be 19 tracks, but I can see why he didn't want to cut certain tracks. I just think that, like, there's a moment here, I think it might be after Temporary with Skylar Grey, or like possibly Toby, which was one of the singles, where it feels like, okay, yeah, maybe should have ended there. So I might trim it down a little bit and, of course, make a couple stylistic choices differently. But, I mean, it's a really good album, and I think it's very cool. So that's my number 2 rap album of 2024. And my number 1, as usual, my favorite rap album is from Czarface. But Czarface didn't drop this year. They created another group, a spin-off of Czarface. Came out just this month in December, called Stress Eater. And Czarface is Inspected Deck and Esoteric rapping with DJ 7L on production and scratches. And Stress Eater is Esoteric and 7L with Cool Keith instead of Inspected Deck. And, Keith is cool. Like, fuck, that's his name. I didn't mean to say that. Keith is cool. I remember hearing, like, Dr. Octagon back in the day, and actually went back and revisited that recently after checking out this album, playing it over and over. I was like, man, I should give that old shit a spin again. It's been a long time. Like, Ogar used to play that when we were skating in, like, the 90s, And it was cool to hear him in this universe. It's kind of perfect because he's always been a little odd, and, Czarface stuff is always really, like, not just like sample skits, like they have an amalgam of, they'll take like little bits of infomercials and old like public domain sounding records, just like ancient shit, and mix it together almost in a Beastie Boys sort of way, but sort of within this collage is the whole record. Like everything flows into each other with these little interludes and just really interesting, quirky samples throughout. And it's always like comic book themed, as their characters are. And this record just feels like any other record that they've done, but I would say in the best way. Like they put out last year, to me, was like, oh, that's a real return to form. I said, check out this record and then check out their first two, from like 2015, 2016, because, there's sort of a middle era where they started doing more collabs and they started kind of going in other directions with 7L's production and maybe a little more synth heavy, electronic influences, something like that. But this shit is like the classic boom bap side of Czarface that I love the most. And Esoteric's rhymes are in top form, and Keith is a wonderful addition to this. Like, he's always a little bit unconventional in his patterns, and like he doesn't even always rhyme. Like, it's interesting to see somebody who's got this freight train flow with all these multis like Esoteric, and then pass it off to Keith, who's like literally esoteric and like has the confidence enough to just flow and not care about the technicality as much. It makes for an interesting pairing. you would think that it's like, oh, this might not be a good match for that reason, the technical differences, but it actually kind of keeps it interesting. I remember on the first couple Czarface records, there would be times where I was like, wait a second, was that Deck? No, wait a second. And I kind of go back and forth, like kind of like when I first got into the Beastie Boys, back in the day, or first getting into Run DMC, I was like, wait a second, which one's rapping there? Or when you first get into Wu-Tang, like, okay, I got Method Man's voice, I got Inspector Deck's voice, I got Ghostface voice, you're figuring that out. But like their styles at times, because they're so heavy on the punchlines and multis and stuff, and they're passing the mic back and forth so much, it's like a perfect marriage. And yet Stress Eater is like the perfect contrast. So I have loved this record. I've had such a good time playing it. There's a feature from Ice-T on there. Mega Ran is on there. Not a ton of guests, but still like perfectly in keeping with everything that I've loved from Czarface in the past. And, it's punk rock. It's a 30-minute record. I played it over and over again. I got my CD in the mail the other day. And actually, I mentioned last year that I wrote this song called DC vs. Marvel that I wanted to be a Czarface collaboration for my next record. And Esoteric actually just recorded his verses for that this past weekend. So that will come out on the next album. Is finally in the works. Probably can't call it, Czarface, but maybe we'll get a hold of Inspector Deck one of these days. Who knows? But man, I'm really happy with that track. I'm really happy with this album, Stress Eater. It's called Everybody Eats. It's got amazing artwork as usual, and it's just fucking boom bap, sample heavy, comic book reference heavy, all that fun shit. And it's such a joy to listen to. And yeah, it's classic, man. It's classic. So that is my top 10 hip-hop albums of the year. At number 10, B. Dolan. At number 9, The Beat Miners. At number 8, Casual. Number 7, Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. At number 6, LL Cool J. At number 5, Redman. At number 4, Ice Cube. At number 3, Decca, D-E-C-A. Number 2 is Eminem. And number 1 is Stress Eater from the world of Czarface. So that is our show. I will return to you with actually a separate episode for our top 10 rock, punk, metal, hardcore albums, all the other stuff that I listen to. But I thought it'd be fun just to do this real quick and cut them in half, 10 and 10. So there you go. Thanks for listening. And as we go into 2025, it will be soon the 10-year anniversary of the Take 92 podcast. So I don't have any big plans or anything, but who knows, maybe I'll come back with an anniversary episode or something like that, even if we can't do another season. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens. And thanks for listening for 10 fucking years.